Welcome everyone to the lecture on Chapter 11 of Laitz 5th edition. This chapter is all about 6/4 chords and plagal motion. When we talk about the word plagal motion, it refers to the subdominant chord. So this is what this chapter is about. Now Laitz says in the overview, so far we have worked with triads that consist entirely of consonant intervals above their bass note. Root position triads have a fifth and a third, marked 5/3 with the figured bass. First inversion triads have a sixth and a third, which we call 6/3 inversion. Now in this chapter, we tackle the second inversion triads. This is the 6/4 inversion, second inversion. It's called 6/4 because it includes an interval of a sixth and a dissonant fourth above the bass. Here's the root, here's the sixth, and here's that dissonant fourth. The 4 always wants to fall down to 3. And although 6 is consonant, it also wants to drop into a more stable 5. So what we get is 6/4 chord falling down to a root position chord, 5/3. Now because they are dissonant, these 6/4 chords do not function in the same way as a root position or a first inversion triad. Instead, they are often only what we call apparent harmonies because they result from the coincidence of embellishing tones. Laitz says, therefore, the 6/4 chords tend to occur only in a few specific contexts, of which we are going to discuss below. Look at the bottom of the page where it says, what are the 4 types of 6/4 chords? There are 4 basic types. The first one is called the pedal 6/4. The second one is a passing 6/4. The third one is an arpeggiating 6/4. And the last one is a cadential 6/4. Now I have cleverly color-coded everything. You notice that pedal, passing, and arpeggiating 6/4, all of that information is outlined in red, whereas the cadential 6/4 is outlined in yellow. And the reason for that is because pedal, passing, and arpeggiating 6/4 chords are in the level 2A, the embellishing, the decorative level of analysis. Whereas the cadential 6/4 is in the level 2B in a structural position, a structural function, and that is the difference right there. Moving on to page 260, I've outlined at the top in red where Laitz says, notice too that the bass note of each 6/4 chord is doubled in the right hand. He's talking about exercise 11.11 below. We're going to take a look at that together right now. He says, notice too that the bass note of each 6/4 chord is doubled in the right hand, which means that the 3 upper voices form a complete triad. He says it will be useful to remember this trick as you accumulate additional harmonic paradigms later in this chapter. So again, I have color-coded example 11.1 in yellow for the 3 types of 6/4 chords, pedal 6/4, passing 6/4, and arpeggiating 6/4, that are all going to go in the level 2A or decorative non-structural position in the phrase model. Take a listen to the pedal 6/4 in letter A. You notice that the C in the left hand and the C in the bottom of the triad of the right hand stay stationary, while the 2 upper voices move from 5/3 up to 6/4 and retreat back down to 5/3. That's the definition of a pedal 6/4. It comes from probably the way organists play, where they would put their foot down on a pedal tone, literally a pedal underneath the keyboard that looks just like a ginormous piano or organ keyboard, and they put their foot down on the C, and then they can move the upper voices against it while their foot would hold down that pedal tone. That's where the terminology probably comes from. And I've also put in directional arrows to show you the up and down motion, changing from 5/3 to 6/4, back to 5/3. But that's all tonic expansion. Letter B, the passing 6/4 is also all tonic expansion. This happens when you go from a 1 passing through another chord into a 1/6. So you're expanding the oneness, in other words. Now this is reversible. You could go 1/6 through the chord to the 1. It can go either direction, but nevertheless, it's all expanding the 1 chord. So the passing 6/4 chord in this case, 1, 5, 6, 4 to 1, is all tonic expansion. Let's go on to the arpeggiating 6/4. So again, we're going to be using the C major triad. It's It's so much easier to just call that all tonic expansion and not worry literally that this is a 1 chord, changing to 1-6-4, changing to 1-6. I put that in blue there. That's what you don't want to do. I just put literally that's what it is. But on the other hand, is it? The ear is just really perceiving the C on the bottom. So you don't actually need to put 1-6-4 and 1-6. You can just put a 1 chord at the beginning of the phrase and then just mark the chords that are arpeggiated through second inversion 6-4 and first inversion with a 6 and just call it good. That's all tonic expansion right there. Non-structural. It happens in the level 2A position of tonic expansion. Now we get to the good stuff. The cadential 6-4, and I've done this in purple, a much more bold color, because this is a structural function in the phrase model. Tonic, dominant. It's as if we have a preparation, a suspension, and a resolution, kind of a principle going on here. The 5-6-4 is not stable. It has to resolve to its root position. Dominant with an embellishment on it, but it's structural, it's strong. We'll save the cadential 6-4 for last, but let's now discuss the pedal, the passing, and the arpeggiating 6-4 chords that appear in level 2A, the decorative embellishing position in the phrase model. Now I've drawn a picture where it says pedal 6-4 chord. It's abbreviated as ped 6-4, and you'll notice I drew a straight line across the bottom, and then I drew 2 lines that have a little upward and then come back to where they are, kind of a diagram there. That is the motion of the 2 upper voices. It says embellishing the tonic. As you listen to example point 2 below, we're going to play it together. You'll notice that each of them expresses a single tonic harmony. Okay, look down at 11.2 right now. This is in the key of B flat, expanding the 1 chord with upper neighbor motion in the 2 upper voices. They go up and they come back down. Okay, so that's just tonic expansion, with a little fancy melodic thing going on in the 2 upper voices. That's all it is. The harmony did not change. Laitz says above, I outlined it in red, the bass remains stationary while 2 of the upper voices move together in parallel motion upwards to upper neighbors, then back down. Now, if you remember what Silent Night sounds like, that's where it comes from. Okay, that's your upper neighbors. Now, let's look at the piece on the next page. No, there's Silent Night. Now you can see I've marked the upward motion back down. So the chord is 1-5-3, temporarily going to 6-4, coming back down to 5-3. So the 6-4 is labeled in the level 2A as ped 6-4, and it's all tonic expansion. Now, let's look at letter B. This is a piece by a composer that I have not yet become acquainted with, Zenobia Powell Perry. The piece goes like this: D major, play it again. Okay, so you've got D major, D chord. Now the 6-4 motion, I've circled it in the blue notes. The alto part went A, B, A, and that tenor part went F sharp, G, F sharp. They're buried in the middle of the texture, but you can see how that motion goes. Let's go back to 11.2 now, and this will make more sense. So Silent Night had the upper neighbors, 1-5-3, 6-4, back to where they came from. Now, the piece we just looked at, is this, with those upper neighbors. All right, so that is the definition of what a pedal 6-4 chord is. A bottom note stays stationary while 2 upper voices move above it and back down. Now the pedal 6-4 chord was used here for tonic expansion. You can also use a dominant chord with pedal 6-4 chords to prolong the dominant. At the bottom of page 261, Laitz says, embellishing the dominant. Now pedal 6-4 chords can prolong the dominant and not just the tonic. We're going to look at a piece by Henri Casadei-Sous on the next page. He is a French composer, and this is a piece that I am just going to play like the 2 outer voices, the violin part, and the bass line of the piano. if you look underneath where I've outlined this in yellow, there's your 5/7, and then those two inside voices move up to the 6/4, and then the next bar they move back down to where they were, and then it shifts to the tonic right there at the end. Now this page wasn't outlined very easily, so the top blurb that says pedal 6/4 chords sometimes feature passing rather than neighbor motion in the upper voices, and then I put a dotty dotty dot little arrow going down to letter B because it's referring to letter B, the Mozart Symphony in A major. Take a look at this one. I'm going to play it for you now. Okay, so we have one chord, 5/7, 6/4, 5 to 1. So it's a 5 chord with the soprano motion going 7, 6, 5 against the bass, flipping to 1 at the end. And I've outlined that for you in green, scale degree 7, scale degree 6, scale degree 5 going down. That's your ped 6/4 because the bass stayed stationary. Now let's take a reduction of the part A of Casa dei Su here. We talked about that a minute ago. We're going to compare the Casa dei Su with Mozart's Symphony in A major, the reduction of part B of the Mozart. This is a directional comparison is the way I would see it. So look at the Casa dei Su there on the bottom left. D sharp goes up to E, back down to D sharp, and finally flips to the tonic. As opposed to the Mozart, which is the ped 6/4 passing downwards. So both of those are pedal 6/4s, but they have different directional ways that they function. Moving on to the top of page 263, there's a skill check 11.1. I went ahead and did this for you just to save a little time so you can see how to do this with using figured bass number. So it says, using the provided analysis and the partial outer voices, play and write a keyboard style realization of each short paradigm. Keyboard style means you put 2 or 3 chordal tones in the right hand and the left hand just plays single bass notes. So that's why it's constructed not SATB, but keyboard style here. So you've got 1, 5, 3. The upper 2 voices move up to 6/4 and then back down to 5, 3. So for practical purposes, my right hand thumb just stays on F, F, F. And the upper 2 voices move up like that, okay? 2, 3. Now let's look at letter B. This is in key of C minor. And they gave me the voicing of the chord by putting that E flat on the top there, okay? You notice this time the stationary note in the left hand and then in the right hand, it's the center note there. C, 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 C. So while 2 of the pairs of voices moved up and down, the center one stayed stationary. And now 5/7, 6/4, 5/3, 1. Letter B showed both tonic and dominant expansion, using both of the techniques we just talked about on the previous page. Let's now leave the ped 6/4 and talk about the second category of 6/4 chords that are non-structural. This is the passing 6/4 chord. So the passing 6/4 chord is named for the bass passing tone that it harmonizes. If you look down at 11.4, it shows itself in one of the most typical types of contexts, connecting a 1/6 to a 1 with a voice exchange between the outer voices. So let's look at this piece by Baranowska, L'Espérance, and it's letter A. It goes like this. Okay, I'm going to play the outer 2 voices now. Now right here where the beginning of the voice exchange happens, soprano has F, bass has A flat. Now they have swapped positions. Soprano now has A flat and the bass has F. And that is accomplished from 1/6 through a passing 5/6/4 inverted chord to 1. Now I've put underneath in yellow level 2A. That passing chord is not structural. It is not structural at all. It is a passing chord in level 2A. So 1/6 passing to 1. Now you can also reharmonize the passing chord not as a 5-6-4, but you can interchange it with a diminished seventh chord in first inversion. So look down at letter B. Here's 1-6. Now 5-6-4, the notes are G, C, E. Now we're going to reharmonize it with the 7 diminished 6 in the next one. 1-6. Now B flat, B flat. So the first one had C, and the next one has B flat. It's a very subtle difference. Take a listen again. 5-6-4. And the next one. 7 diminished 6 to 1. So that's just replacing scale degree 5 with scale degree 4. Let's continue on now on page 264. We're going to now see the passing 6-4 chord in a slightly different metrical version. Rather than being a passing chord in a bar, we're going to expand the time out a bit. If you look at example 11.5, it talks about how the passing 6-4 chord expands the tonic, in this case by passing from 1 to 1-6. And this is in an 8-bar phrase here. So it says, as you listen, notice the arch-shaped bass line. Bar 1 is A in the bass, B in the bass for bar 2, bar 3, C, bar 4, D, and then it turns around to reverse into like an arch-like shape right there. Even though it falls on a downbeat, it is metrically unaccented compared with the chords that surround it, and this is because the meter extends past the bar line. So instead of being 4 beats in a bar, the 4 bars you see from 1718 and 1920 actually function in the same way to make a group of 4 measures instead of a group of 4 beats within a single measure. So I'm going to play this in slow motion so you hear the effect. It's going to go 1, passing through the 5-6-4 to the 1-6, 5-4-2 back to down to the 1, then it does some other things. 1, 5-6, that's the passing chord to 1-6. 5-4-2, that's the neighbor, it goes back down to the C, 1-6. I played it slow so you could hear it. It actually goes much faster. Let's see if I can do it. When you hear it at the appropriate tempo, it makes a lot more sense. I want to point out something in the melodic realm in bar 21. We have on beat 3, in 2 voices, a preparation in the soprano and one in the alto, and then in the downbeat of the next bar, it's like a restruck suspension on those 2 pitches, and then they resolve down. Do you see how I marked it? Preparation, restruck suspension, and the resolution. Now if I play it block, it sounds like this. And then you can hear the suspensions. Now the entire piece is tonic expansion all the way until you get to bar 22, bottom line, second bar in, predominant, then dominant, then tonic. And there you go. Now go to the top of page 265 in your textbook and let's look at skill check 11.2. It says, in chorale style, play and write both versions of the voice exchange below. They will differ by just a single pitch in a single voice. So basically, in the exercise we're doing right now, we're just looking for one of them to use scale degree 4 and one to use scale degree 5. Chorale style is SATB. So here we go. So you'll see in the tenor, A sharp, B. Now look in the alto. Scale degree 5, 4, 5. Compare that with letter B. 5, 5. Do you hear the difference? First one has scale degree 4 in it. And letter B has just scale degree 5. That is the only difference between those two. If you want something more tame, then you would choose to do letter B. If you want something a little more spicy, then you would choose to use that diminished 7th chord in first inversion instead. Let's move on to number 3. arpeggiating 6/4 chords. The abbreviation for the arpeggiating 6/4 is capital ARP and a 6/4. Now Laitz says that the arpeggiating 6/4 chord is the only type of 6/4 chord that is consonant. So how this works is it extends a stable chord, usually in root position, by using embellished arpeggiations, in other words, chord inversions. This kind of stuff. Now we had this piece by Maria Szymanowska in the last chapter. Remember when we did passing, all that stuff we had to label in the melodic realm? Now we're looking at the same piece in the harmonic realm. Now look at what I've written underneath. We have, this is all just going to be a one chord. You're not going to go 1, 1, 6, 4, 1, 6, 4, 1, 1, 6, 4. No, just know that that's just an arpeggiation. It's a thing pianists do. When we use our pedal, it also maintains that E flat aurally on the bottom for you. Okay, so do not label the arpeggiated 6/4 in your analysis. Don't do that. It's just all one chord straight across, and in the third bar it's just 5, and the last bar is just 1. Okay, so again, do not go 1, 1, 6, 4, 1, 6, 4. Don't do that. It's just 1, 1, 5, 1. Makes a lot more sense that way. Now go to the very bottom of this page where it says, in Fanny Hensel's piano trio. Fanny Hensel is Felix Mendelssohn's sister. Hensel was her married name. Now, he's an amazing composer, and he was known historically in a very famous way. But what many people don't realize is she also was a famous composer. In fact, it is said of Fanny that she was just as gifted as he was, but because of her sex, she wasn't really allowed. Once she got married, that was kind of the end of that. Thankfully, her music is starting to get the credit that it deserves. We're going to look at 11.7. Laitz says in Fanny Hensel's piano trio, the bass arpeggiation spans 4 measures. The root position tonic chord in the first measure is in effect throughout that whole bar. And it kind of continues the whole way. Now, if you look carefully at the purple notes I've circled in that bass line, F sharp, next bar, A, third bar, C sharp, and the last bar, first bar, F sharp, second bar, A, third bar, C sharp, and the last bar, F sharp. So the bass arpeggiation extends itself over a 4-bar span. So the question is, how should we notate that? So in this case, we've done in level 1, instead of going 1, 7 diminished, 6, just do the whole measure as 1. And that middle chord can be like just a neighbor tone. The same in bar 2. Now we're going to do the 1 chord in first inversion with the neighbor tone in the middle, 6/4 inversion. That one, the bass didn't change, so that clearly just stays on 6/4. And same in the last bar, 5/3 just stays there. The whole thing is just tonic expansion the whole way over. So the arpeggiated 6/4 chord takes place in the third measure in this example. Now let's look down at 11.8. This is a piece I do not know, and a composer that I also do not know, but it looks like a pretty cool piece. I'm just going to play the treble clef with the first bass note of each bar and leave out the 32nd notes so we can hear how this piece sounds. All right, slower so we can look at the analysis. Arpeggiated 6/4. Now here comes 5/4/3, the dominant. Bass arpeggiation to a different inversion of the 5/7. Now root position 5/7. Back to tonic. All right, there you go. So the pacing is a little different, but we show an arpeggiated 6/4 for tonic expansion in bar 2. And then we have some dominant expansion starting in bar 3 where we go from second inversion to first inversion, to root of 5/7, and finally back to the tonic in the last bar.